Okay, so today we're going to really dive into some English vocabulary that's super important if you're getting ready for postgraduate entrance exams.
Yep, absolutely.
We're looking specifically at the words from Day 15, Unit 4, 26-35 zeros.
Right.
And, it's not just about being able to define them. It's really about getting that deeper understanding and feeling confident when you see them on the exam.
Yeah, and this group of words is actually really interesting because it covers so many different areas. It's about how we think, what we're responsible for, time, and even how we feel.
Right.
So we're talking about words like ponder and responsible, dawn, launch, even words about our emotions like mood and irritable.
Yeah, and I think what we really want to do in this deep dive is move beyond just memorizing them.
Right.
We want to understand how to use them in different situations, recognize them when we read them, and maybe even talk about some common mistakes people make with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. Let's ponder the words ponder and ponderous.
Okay, so ponder basically means to think deeply about something,
Right.
to really consider it carefully before making a decision. Like the example in the source material. She pondered for a moment before replying.
Uh-huh.
You can kind of imagine her thinking it over.
Right.
And for the exam, if a question asks about how someone reacts after they've pondered, they've taken their time to think about it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a quick reaction. It's that time spent thinking it through. Like when you're writing an essay, you might ponder the best way to organize your arguments.
Exactly.
But then there's ponderous, which sounds similar but has a totally different meaning.
Yeah.
It means something is slow, clumsy, maybe even boring.
Right, like the opposite of quick thinking.
Exactly.
Like the example in the source, he spoke in a slow, ponderous voice. Can you picture someone giving a lecture that's so dull everyone's falling asleep? That's a ponderous voice.
Yeah, definitely.
But remember, ponderous can be more than just speech. Remember how we connected it to clumsy? Like the complaints procedure is clumsy and time-consuming?
Right.
You could almost say that the procedure itself is ponderous because it's so inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see clumsy in the exam, ask yourself, is it about a physical action or about something that's just not working well?
Okay, yeah, that's an important point. And speaking of clumsy, that's our next word. It has two main meanings. One is about being awkward and unskilled, and the other is about something being difficult to handle or use.
Right.
We saw that in the example with the complaints procedure.
Exactly. And the source also talks about competition law being clumsy.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, this isn't about someone tripping over their own feet. It means the law itself is a bit awkward or difficult to use effectively.
Right, like a tool that's not quite the right fit for the job.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on to a group of words that can be tricky because they sound similar. Respond, responsible, and correspond. First up, respond. This is all about how we react to something, whether it's by answering a question or taking action. The source mentions an immediate response, which emphasizes how quickly it happens. It also talks about writing in response to something, which is a more formal situation.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the noun response, which is simply the answer or reaction.
Exactly. And remember, if you see a question where you need to respond quickly,
All right.
make sure you really understand what it's asking before you jump to an answer. Don't be impulsive.
Right. Think before you respond.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up is responsible, which is all about accountability.
Right.
The source gives us a good example. Mike is responsible for designing the entire project. He's the one in charge, right? And then it goes on to talk about being responsible stewards of the planet, which is a much bigger kind of responsibility. And this leads us to the noun responsibility itself, which is that duty or obligation.
Yeah.
If you're answering questions about roles and duties, responsible and responsibility are keywords to know. Okay, now correspond is the third word in this group, and it has a couple of important meanings. One meaning is to be in agreement or to be similar. Like in the source, it says, your account of events does not correspond with hers. So that's like a direct contradiction. But it can also mean to be similar, as in the word corresponds roughly in meaning to our homesickness. You need to recognize both of these meanings to really understand the relationships between ideas in reading passages.
Absolutely. And don't forget that correspond can also mean to communicate by writing letters, which gives us the noun correspondence.
Oh, right.
Like comprehensive records of recent correspondence. You might not see this meaning in all postgraduate exams, but it's still part of the word's full meaning. And then there's the adjective corresponding, which means matching or related.
Okay.
Like, such a view would require a corresponding shift in the way U.S. society today views fire. So remember, respond is about action. Responsible is about duty, and correspond is about agreement or similarity.
Yeah, if you can keep those three ideas straight, you'll be in good shape. Okay, moving on. Let's look at another set of words that people often mix up because they sound alike. Phase, phrase, and feasible.
Okay.
First up, phase. Think of this as a stage or period of time in a process. The source talks about technology being in an early phase of development. It also mentions a significant phase in European history, which shows how important this word can be in different contexts. And phase can also be a verb, meaning to introduce something gradually.
Right. Then we have phrase, which is a group of words, especially a common expression, like he just comes out with the same old stock phrases. English is full of these kinds of colorful phrases, as the source mentions. And as a verb, phrase means to express something in words. So remember, a phase is a stage or period, while a phrase is a group of words. Don't get tripped up by the similar sounds.
Yeah, definitely. And lastly, we have feasible. This means something is possible or practical. The source gives a great example of an idea that didn't seem feasible at first, and then it asks, sounds great, but how feasible is this vision? Which really makes you think about whether something can actually be done. So phase is about time, phrase is about language, and feasible is about possibility. Keep those separate in your mind.
Exactly. Now let's move on to a couple of words that deal with probability. Likely and probable. Likely, as an adjective, means something is probable or expected.
All right.
The source says tickets are likely to be expensive. And it also gives a more nuanced example. You're more likely to be heard if you can connect your disagreement to a higher purpose. We also have likelihood, which is the noun form. And while we're on the topic of similar words, it's good to remember unlike, alike, and likewise, because those can show up in comparison questions.
Good point. Now, probable is also an adjective meaning likely to happen. The source gives us the two outcomes are equally probable, and we have probability, which is the noun form. So likely and probable are pretty similar, and in many everyday situations, you can use them interchangeably.
That's true. But probable can sometimes feel a little stronger, like it's based on logic or statistics. Imagine you're predicting the outcome of a science experiment. You might say the result is probable because there's evidence to support it, while likely is more general based on what you normally expect.
Okay, I see. So it's a subtle difference, but good to be aware of.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears and look at some words related to beginnings. Dawn, dusk, launch, and initiate. Dawn is the sunrise, the start of the day.
Right.
The source mentions waking up before dawn, which is pretty literal, but then it also gives us this beautiful metaphorical example. Peace marked a new dawn in the country's history. Being able to understand those metaphorical uses of dawn is really important for interpreting bigger themes and reading passages.
Yeah, and in direct contrast to dawn, we have dusk, which is twilight, right after the sun sets.
Right.
The source gives some really simple examples. The streetlights go on at dusk, and she arrived home as dusk was falling. These are the kind of words you might see in descriptive writing to set a certain mood or atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. Now, launch is a really dynamic word. It means to set something in motion or introduce it with a lot of energy. We see it used for things like launching a police investigation and launching an updated website. It's like starting something with purpose and force.
Exactly. And then there's initiate, which means to begin or start something. The source mentions initiating a national debate and initiating a government program.
Okay.
We also have the noun initiative, which is a new plan or the ability to act independently, and initial, the adjective, which means first. So launch often implies a more formal or public beginning, while initiate can be more about taking that first step.
Right, like launching a spaceship versus just starting a conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about togetherness. We have companion and accompany. A companion is someone you spend time with, a friend.
Right.
The source talks about a good friend being a dependable companion.
And accompany means to go with someone or for something to happen along with something else.
Okay.
We see it used in examples like a wife accompanying her husband and text being accompanied by photographs. The adjective form is accompanying. So companion is the person and accompany is the action of being together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Don't mix up accompany with something like assist, because it's more about being present with someone than actually helping them.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to a group of words related to judgment and making calculations. Reckon, reckless, and estimate. Reckon can mean to calculate something, but it's also used informally to mean think or suppose.
Yeah, a very casual word.
Exactly. The source has an example of someone who reckons they'll get a job and then experts reckoning that prices are down. It's like a more relaxed way of saying believe or expect. Now, reckless is totally different. It describes someone who doesn't think about the consequences of their actions.
Yeah.
They just do things without being careful. The source mentions being reckless with money and reckless as a writer. The adverb form is recklessly. So there's no thought involved in being reckless, whereas reckon is still a form of thinking, just a less formal one.
Exactly.
And then we have estimate, which can be both a verb and a noun. It means to calculate something roughly. We see it used with police estimating the size of a crowd and a project being estimated to last a certain amount of time. The source also mentions overestimate and underestimate.
Right.
So reckon is a casual thought or calculation. Reckless is about being careless, and estimate is a rough calculation. They all involve some form of judgment, but in very different ways.
That's a good summary.
Okay.
Now let's look at some IMIT words. Intimate, ultimate, and approximate. Intimate as an adjective means close or personal.
Okay.
The source gives the example of not being on intimate terms with your neighbors.
Right.
And we also have intimately, which is the adverb form. Think of intimate as describing relationships or knowledge that's deeply personal and private.
Right, like a close friend.
Exactly. And then ultimate as an adjective means final or most important. It can also be a noun meaning the best. The source gives the examples of the ultimate decision and war being the ultimate failure. The adverb form is ultimately. So this word highlights the end point or the highest degree of something.
Right, the final word on a matter.
Exactly. And finally, we have approximate, which means something is close to the actual value, but not exact. It can also be a verb meaning to be close to. The source gives the example of an approximate cost.
Okay.
And we also have approximately, the adverb. So we have closeness with intimate, finality with ultimate, and nearness with approximate, all important concepts in academic writing and speaking.
Right, and when you're asked for an approximate number in an exam, don't worry about being super precise. Okay, let's move on to some words about our surroundings and feelings. Climate, surround, atmosphere, mood, temper, and personality. Climate refers to the weather patterns over a long period of time, but it can also refer to a general feeling or attitude like the current economic climate.
Right.
The source talks about adapting to a changing climate and creating the right climate for social change, showing both literal and metaphorical uses.
And then we have surround, which as a verb means to enclose something.
Okay.
The source gives us the image of a garden surrounded by a wall. It can also be used more abstractly, like when you're trying to focus on something, but you're surrounded by problems. And then there's surroundings, the noun, which refers to the area around something.
Right, the environment. Atmosphere can refer to the air, but it can also mean the general feeling of a place. Like the source mentions a relaxing atmosphere, and then there's the Earth's atmosphere, which is getting warmer. So you can think of atmosphere as the more immediate feeling you get from a place compared to climate, which is broader and more long-term.
Right. And then we have mood, which is a temporary emotional state.
Okay.
The source gives the examples of lightening the mood and an app that recommends movies based on your mood. Then there's temper, which can refer to anger, but also to a person's general disposition. And as a verb, it can mean to moderate something.
Okay.
The source mentions controlling your temper and shoppers tempering their spending. And finally, personality, which is all the unique qualities that make up who a person is.
Right, that combination of traits that make someone them. So all these words together really create a picture of our internal and external worlds. Being able to see how climate sets a broader context while atmosphere is more immediate and mood is that personal feeling can really help you understand texts that focus on human experience.
Exactly. Okay, let's look at some words that end in ate. Circumstance, circulate, ventilate, accumulate, calculate, and calendar. Circumstance refers to a condition or situation.
Right.
Like the source mentions white blood cells in normal circumstances.
Okay. And circulate means to move around or spread.
We see it used in the examples of blood circulating and rumors circulating.
And then we have ventilate, which means to allow fresh air into a place or to express something openly. The source mentions a bathroom ventilated by a fan.
Right.
Then there's accumulate, which means to gather or collect something. The source gives the example of debts accumulating.
Calculate means to work out mathematically or to estimate something, We see it used in an example with a mathematical formula.
Right.
And calendar is a system for organizing time, like the racing calendar mentioned in the source. So this group of words touches on conditions, movement, and organization, which are all important things to think about when you're analyzing events or data.
Absolutely. Now, for our last set of words, we have sow, reap, irrigate, irritable, yield, and output. Sow means to plant seeds or spread something.
Okay.
The source talks about watering well after sowing seeds and the saying, you reap what you sow. Reap means to harvest something or to gain something as a result of your efforts. The source mentions reaping the rewards. Right, like you get what you deserve.
Exactly. Irrigate means to supply water to land, like how rivers irrigate plains in the source example.
Okay. Then there's irritable, which means easily annoyed.
Yeah.
The source gives the example of an irritable gesture. Yield can refer to the amount of something produced, or it can be a verb meaning to produce something,
Right.
like the source mentions investment yield. And finally, output is the amount of something produced, like in the example about workers not improving their output.
Yeah.
This last group of words is often about cause and effect, effort and result, which are really important concepts in all kinds of subjects.
Absolutely. And finally, let's not forget outlook and insight. Outlook is your view or perspective on something.
Oh.
Like the source mentions losing a job, changing your outlook on life. And insight is a sudden understanding or a deep perception.
Right.
The source mentions work offering useful insights. These are really important words for showing that you can think critically and analyze things in your postgraduate studies.
Absolutely. So we've gone through a lot of vocabulary. To make this all a bit more real, how about we imagine a conversation between two students, Maya and Sam, who are getting ready for their exam.
Sounds good. Let's listen in.
Okay, so imagine Maya and Sam are studying together in a library.
Right.
They're surrounded by books and papers, and they're feeling a little overwhelmed by all the vocabulary they need to learn. Here's how their conversation might go.
Okay.
Maya says, "This postgraduate exam vocab is a beast. I've been pondering the best way to remember all these words. It feels so ponderous sometimes, like wading through treacle." And Sam replies, "Tell me about it. It would be clumsy of us to just skim these lists, though. They're bound to come up. Did you respond to Professor Lee's email about the study group?"
Maya says, "Not yet. I feel responsible for organizing my notes first. My understanding of some of these terms doesn't quite correspond with yours. Can we go over feasible again?"
And Sam says, "Sure, this is a critical phase of our preparation, you know. We need to make sure we're both clear on everything. I keep using the same old phrases in my practice essays. I need to find some more academic-sounding language. Is it even feasible to learn all this before the exam?"
Maya replies, "It's likely we'll see a lot of these in the reading comprehension. The probability is pretty high. I started studying before dawn this morning, trying to get a head start."
"Wow, you're dedicated," says Sam. "By dusk, I'm usually ready for a nap. They're going to launch a new online resource next week, apparently." "Oh, good," Maya says. "Maybe we should initiate a study session with Sarah. She's a great study companion. I hope she'll accompany me to the exam center. I always feel better with a friend."
And Sam says, "I reckon our current study plan is pretty solid. It would be reckless to change it now. I estimate we have about 3 weeks left."
"I have an intimate understanding of some concepts," Maya says, "but others still feel kind of distant. Ultimately, it's about consistent effort, right? The approximate number of words we need to know is just overwhelming."
"The academic climate can be intense," Sam replies. "I try to surround myself with positive study vibes. The atmosphere in this library is usually pretty good for focusing. My mood definitely affects my productivity, though. I need to keep my temper in check when I hit a roadblock. My personality tends to get a bit stressed under pressure."
"Yeah, under these circumstances, staying calm is key," Maya says. "Information about the exam format should circulate soon. I need to ventilate my study space more. It's getting stuffy. These vocabulary words really accumulate, don't they? I need to calculate how much time to spend on each section based on my study calendar."
"I'm sowing the seeds of knowledge now, hoping to reap a good score later," Sam replies. "Hopefully all this effort will yield the results we want. My study output has been a bit erratic lately. My outlook on the exam changes daily."
And Maya says, "I gained some valuable insight from that last practice test. It helped me see where I need to focus."
That was a great example of how those words can come up naturally in a conversation. You can almost feel how anxious they are about the exam.
Right, it's relatable. Okay, let's quickly recap some of the key themes. We looked at words related to thinking, like ponder and reckon, Then we talked about responsibility and agreement with responsible and correspond. We discussed beginnings with dawn and launch, and also feelings and environment with mood and climate.
Exactly. And just for fun, let's try some memory tricks for some of the trickier words. For ponderous, think of it as something so full of thought that it's slow and heavy. For feasible, imagine that if something is feasible, you have enough money to do it, so it's possible. And for reckless, well, if you're reckless, you won't wreck less. In fact, you might cause more damage.
I like that. How about intimate?
For intimate, think of your innermost circle of friends. And ultimate, well, that's the final one, the best one.
Those are good. Remember, understanding how these words are used in different situations, like we saw in the source examples and in that student conversation, is much more effective than just memorizing definitions. Try using these words when you speak and write. Review the examples, create your own sentences, and even practice having similar conversations with your study buddies.
Exactly. And as you continue getting ready for your exams, keep in mind that having a strong vocabulary is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Mastering these words will not only help you do well in your postgraduate entrance exams, but will also help you understand complex ideas and express yourself clearly, which are really important skills for your academic journey and beyond. So keep challenging yourself and embrace the learning process.
Well said.